I was 30 years old when I walked into my own bedroom and found my birth mother. Yes, the woman who abandoned me at birth in bed with my husband. You'll never believe what I'm about to tell you, but every word is true. That was the night everything shattered. That was the night I stopped being a wife and stopped being a daughter. People say betrayal from a stranger cuts deep, but betrayal from blood? That's a wound that never heals. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stood there, watching them tangled in my sheets like I didn't exist. And you'd think the worst part was catching them. But no, the worst part came after. Because instead of leaving my house in shame, she stayed, moved her things in, took over my kitchen, sat in my chair, and turned the man I married into a stranger I couldn't recognize. She punished me for walking in on her secret. She punished me for being her daughter. And by the time I realized what she was doing, I had lost everything. Even myself. Now, I'm 85. And I've never told anyone the full story. Not until today. So sit down and listen carefully. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a warning about what happens when you invite a devil into your home and realize too late she came from your own blood. My name is Della Jean Carter. I am 85 years old. And for the last 55 years, I've lived with the ghost of a woman I once called Mama, though she never earned that title. It was early spring. 1969. The kind of spring where the air still stung your nose at dawn, but warmed like honey by noon. I was 30 then. A quiet school librarian in a small town in Kentucky, married to a man named Thomas Carter, tall, proud. The kind of man who shook hands with a firm grip and said ma'am even when he was angry. Back then, I thought I had peace. A decent man. A small home. A garden where I grew purple lilacs and basil. No children yet. But we were trying. And then the letter came. No return address. Just my name, Della Jean. I remember the way my hands trembled as I opened it. Like even then, my body sensed the storm hiding inside the envelope. The letter was handwritten in neat cursive. Slanted. Careful, too careful. Dear Della Jean, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I want to meet you. I want to see the woman you've become. I hope you'll allow me that chance. With love, Velma. That was the first time I'd seen her name in over 2 decades. Velma, my birth mother. The woman who left me on a church doorstep when I was 2 weeks old. Wrapped in a yellow blanket with a note that simply said, "Please take care of her. I can't." My adoptive parents never hid the truth from me. They told me I was chosen. They told me Velma was young, scared, and not ready. And I believed that, for a while. But as I grew, that blank space where my birth mother should have been that hole in my story started to ache. Who was she? Why did she leave me? And most importantly, why now? I didn't show the letter to Thomas that day. I folded it quietly, tucked it into my Bible, and went about preparing dinner, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I told him. We were sitting at the table, roast chicken, cornbread, and green beans from the garden. He just poured himself a glass of sweet tea when I said, "Thomas, I heard from her. My birth mother." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Velma?" he asked, frowning. I nodded. "She wants to meet." He leaned back in his chair, studying me the way he did when I read too much into things like I was reaching where there was nothing to grab. "She walked away once," he said. "You sure she deserves a second chance?" That question clung to my skin all night, but it was too late. The seed had been planted, and even though every instinct told me to let it rot, I watered it anyway. A week later, I met her at a small diner off Route 3. She was already seated when I arrived. And she looked more like my sister than my mother. A beauty with wine-colored lipstick, a velvet dress too fitted for church, and long silver earrings that caught the light with every subtle turn of her head. "Della Jean," she said, standing up to hug me. I stiffened. She smelled like jasmine and something bitter beneath it. Maybe whiskey. maybe secrets. We sat, we talked, and she cried. She told me she was poor, alone, regretful, that she'd been in and out of hospitals, that no one had ever come close to filling the hole I left behind. I wanted to believe her, even as something in my gut twisted. "Could I visit you sometime?" she asked, her eyes wet and hopeful. And like a fool, like a child still desperate for a mother's love, I said yes. That was the day I opened the door to my past, and unknowingly let the devil walk right through it. She came to our house 3 days later. Velma, with a single brown suitcase and a smile stretched too wide for someone who claimed to be ashamed of her past. Thomas answered the door first. I watched from the kitchen window, my hands still wet from rinsing collard greens. And I wish I could say I saw something suspicious in that first glance between them, some warning flicker in his eyes or hesitation in hers. But no, she smiled. He smiled back. And just like that, my world started to slip slow and silent like water beneath the door before a flood. "Della Jean," she sang, arms outstretched like a child waiting for a hug. "You haven't aged a day." I forced a smile, wiping my hands on my apron. "You must be tired from the trip." She swept into the house like she'd lived there all along, brushing past Thomas, her perfume lingering like smoke-sweet jasmine with a bitter undercurrent, just like I remembered. "I only packed a few things," she said, tapping the suitcase. "Didn't want to impose." Thomas offered to carry it to the guest room. She laughed softly, playfully, like they were old friends already. "No need, handsome. I still have 2 arms that work just fine." "Handsome?" I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. Thomas chuckled awkwardly, probably thinking nothing of it, and disappeared into the den. Velma stood in the hallway, looking around. "This house," she said, her voice dreamy. "It smells like peace." That night I didn't sleep. I listened instead to the creak of floorboards, to the gentle hum of the refrigerator, to the echo of Velma's laughter floating down the hallway from the guest room where she and Thomas stayed up, getting to know each other. "I never knew you liked poetry, Velma," Thomas said once, his voice soft. "There's a lot about me people don't know," she answered, and her words sank into my skin like cold rain. The next morning, Velma was in the kitchen before me. She'd already brewed coffee, set out bacon and eggs, and was dancing barefoot in my robe humming to a Patsy Cline record that hadn't spun in years. "Hope you don't mind," she said cheerfully. I figured it's the least I could do. I should have spoken then, said something, drawn a line, but he didn't. I just smiled and thanked her, like a stranger in my own home. Over the next few days, she planted herself like a vine, slowly creeping into every inch of our lives. She started calling Thomas Tommy. He didn't correct her. She left her perfume bottles on the bathroom counter. He didn't move them. She cooked dinner, changed the radio station, and sat in the front porch swing with him every evening while I watched from the window silent, watching something form between them like smoke I couldn't grab. One night, as we cleared the dishes, I asked him, "Do you think she's settling in okay?" Thomas shrugged. "She's been through a lot, Dee. Let her feel at home." At home? This wasn't her home. This was my life, my marriage, my house. But suddenly, it felt like I was the guest. That night, Velma slipped into the living room wearing a silk nightgown that stopped just above the knee, her frame outlined in the flickering light of the television. I was curled up on the recliner, a blanket around my shoulders. She flopped onto the couch beside Thomas and rested her head on his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. She murmured. "You're warm, Tommy." Thomas didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, to scream, to slap her, but I didn't want to look crazy. I didn't want to be the jealous daughter losing her mind. Instead, I stood up and went to bed, alone. That was the first night I realized I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. It started small, always does. A glance that lingered 1 second too long. A laugh that curled at the corners like a secret being shared. A hand brushing past the other. Too casually. Too often. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That it was nerves. That maybe, just maybe, I was being paranoid. After all, she was my birth mother. What kind of woman would? But even poison wears a pretty dress at first. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had just come home early from the library due to a broken pipe flooding the east wing. I opened the front door quietly and heard them before I saw them. Velma and Thomas. In the kitchen, laughing. The kind of laugh that sounded like teenagers at a sleepover. Breathless and intimate. I stood in the hallway and listened. "Oh, Tommy," she purred. "You always know how to crack me up." Well, someone's gotta keep you entertained while Dee's off alphabetizing cookbooks. My heart didn't stop. It just slowed. Heavy and thick in my chest like wet laundry on a line. I walked into the kitchen like I hadn't heard a thing. Velma was perched on the counter, legs crossed like a queen in her court, sipping lemonade from one of my crystal glasses. Thomas leaned against the fridge, grinning until he saw me. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said, a little too quick. "Velma smilet." Her lipstick was bright red that day, like danger dressed as desire. "I was just telling your husband what a lucky woman you are," she said, hopping off the counter. I nodded, trying to swallow the bile rising in my throat. That night, I tried to talk to Thomas, tried to peel away at whatever wall had formed between us. We sat at the dinner table, the roast chicken untouched on both our plates. "I feel like something's changed," I said quietly. "Between us. Between you and her." He didn't meet my eyes. "You're imagining things," he said. "I see the way she looks at you. I see the way you laugh with her. When did she become the one you confide in, not me?" His jaw tightened. "Maybe if you weren't so busy watching everything like a hawk, we'd still be fine." It landed like a slap. Suddenly, I was the problem. Not the woman stealing my husband with perfume and fake tears. Not the man letting her. Just me. The bitter wife. The paranoid daughter. I slept in the guest room that night. I told him it was because I had a headache. But the truth was, my heart couldn't take another night of hearing them laugh from across the hallway. The next day, Velma redecorated the living room. No warning. No permission. She'd swapped my ivory curtains for velvet red ones, claiming they gave the room a little more life. She moved the Bible from the coffee table and replaced it with a crystal ashtray and a stack of gossip magazines. When I confronted her, she just smiled. "You don't mind, do you?" This house needed a little fire. Thomas said nothing, just sat on the couch, flipping through the newspaper like nothing had changed. I began to feel like a ghost, like I had died and left my body behind. Still making dinner, still folding laundry, still paying bills but invisible. The real me was screaming in a locked room somewhere inside. And Velma? She held the key. One night, I found her in the backyard with Thomas. The porch light was off. She was in a silk robe, barefoot in the grass, sipping wine from my favorite teacup. They were sitting too close. His hand was resting on the small of her back, and they didn't hear me come out. "Lovely night," I said from the doorway, my voice sharp as glass. Velma turned, eyes lazy, smirking. "It is, isn't it? Stars are just dazzling." Thomas stood abruptly, clearing his throat. "Dee, go back inside, you're barefoot." "I am inside," I snapped. They both went silent. That night I didn't sleep. Again. But I did pray. Not for peace. Not for forgiveness. No. I prayed for the strength to see the truth for what it was, even if it broke me. Because something was growing in this house, and it wasn't love. The day I found the receipt was the day everything started to make sense. It was tucked into Thomas's coat pocket, the one hanging behind the front door, a folded square of crinkled paper that seemed to whisper the word betrayal as I pulled it out. A necklace. Diamond. Heart-shaped. Engraved. To V. For the nights that feel like heaven. I stared at it, unblinking, my fingers trembling so hard I almost tore the paper in half. Valentine's Day was still 2 weeks away, but he had already bought her a gift. I put the receipt back where I found it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled as I walked into the kitchen where Velma stood, humming and icing cupcakes like she hadn't gutted me just by existing. "You're in a good mood," she said without turning. "I am," I replied. "Very." She glanced over her shoulder, suspicious. "You're not mad I used the last of the eggs?" "I'll buy more." Something in my voice made her blink, as if she was trying to decide whether I was being kind or if the blade was behind my back. That night, I watched them from the shadows. Thomas had started drinking again, just 1 glass of whiskey after dinner, but now it had grown to 2, sometimes 3. And Velma? She poured every drop. I sat in the hallway, just beyond the crack of the living room door, listening. "You're wasted," she giggled. "You're trouble." He laughed back. "So are you." Silence. A pause too long. Then a soft thud, like something or someone falling into someone else's arms. I rose from the floor and walked away. I didn't need to see it. I knew. By Sunday, I stopped setting a place for Velma at the table. She noticed but said nothing. By Tuesday, she stopped asking how my day was. By Thursday, she moved her teacup to the right side of the cupboard, my side. And by Friday, she wore my silk scarf to the grocery store like it had always belonged to her. I began to wonder how long it would take before she wore my name too. Then came the night of the power outage. A storm had rolled in, angry and loud. The lights flickered twice before going out completely, leaving the house in heavy darkness. I lit candles. She lit one too in my bedroom. I found her sitting at my vanity, brushing her hair in the dark, in my chair, with my brush. "Do you miss her?" I asked. She turned slightly, just enough to look at me in the mirror. "Who?" "The baby you gave away." Silence, then a smile. Small, cold, every day. I stepped closer. "Then why are you trying to destroy her now?" Velma didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just shrugged. Maybe because watching her grow into a woman without me felt like punishment enough. Maybe because the man she married should have been mine all along. Or maybe, she said, setting the brush down with eerie calm, "I just want to know what it feels like to win." I stood frozen. "You're sick." "No, baby. I'm just honest." She stood, her perfume thick in the air between us. "You invited me into your home, but you never locked the door to your marriage." She walked out, barefoot in the candlelight, leaving me shaking. That night, I sat in my room and realized it was no longer my room, no longer my house, no longer my life. She had come back not to reconnect, but to replace, and slowly, piece by piece, she was doing just that. I was fading, not like a dying light, not yet, more like a woman being gently erased. First, from the edges, then deeper. She wore my colors, cooked my recipes, laughed with my husband in the tones I once used to calm him when life grew hard. And the worst part? Thomas didn't even notice, or maybe he didn't care. One morning, I reached for my green cardigan, the one with the stitched flowers around the cuffs that I wore on our anniversary every year. It was gone. I found it later that day, draped over Velma's shoulders like it had always belonged to her. I stared at her. She looked up and said, "Oh, you weren't using it." I figured I'd keep warm. "Take it off." "Excuse me?" "Take it off." She smirked. "You gonna fight me over a sweater, Della?" "No," I said, voice trembling. "I'm going to fight you over everything you're trying to steal." She tossed her head back and laughed, like it was all a joke, like she hadn't spent months chiseling away at my sanity. "You sound ridiculous. You're just jealous." "Jealous?" Of a woman who gave up her child and came back to destroy her? Her smile dropped. Shaw. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the truth, a woman who hated herself so deeply. She needed to drag others into the darkness just to feel less alone. Thomas walked in then, holding his keys. What's going on? He asked. Ask your little girlfriend, I hissed. He blinked. What? Velma straightened. She's imagining things again, Tommy. She thinks I'm seducing you or something. Thomas looked at me. Not with love, not even with anger, but with pity that crushed me the most. He came toward me like I was the one unraveling. Della, baby, you've been under stress. Ever since Velma arrived, you haven't been yourself. You think I don't see it? I cried. You think I don't know what's happening right under my nose? She's your mother, he said gently. Maybe some part of you never forgave her. Maybe this is just projecting. My knees went weak. I'm not crazy, I whispered. Then act like it, he said coldly, walking out the door and slamming it behind him. Velma stood silently, arms folded, watching me fall apart. When I finally looked up at her, she whispered, You're slipping, and no one's going to catch you. That night, I began writing things down in a notebook. Dates, events, quotes, looks, touches, receipts, outfits, a log of betrayal. If no one would believe me, maybe someday I could prove it. The next morning I found the notebook soaked in the bathtub, pages soggy and ink bled. She had found it. And now, she was sending a message. You're not in control anymore. The final straw came one Sunday morning. I had gone to church alone. Thomas said he was tired. Velma said she had a headache. When I returned, they were in the backyard, both lying on a blanket in the sun like lovers in a painting. He was feeding her strawberries. I stood by the back door, gripping the handle, frozen. Velma met my eyes from across the yard. She bit into the strawberry slowly, never breaking her gaze. I closed the door, quietly, carefully, and went upstairs to pack my bags. But not to leave, not yet. Not until I made her pay. Not until I reminded her that no matter how many things she wore or ruined or touched, she would never be me. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of ordinary morning where nothing feels dangerous, the air soft, the sun harmless. I had gone out to buy groceries, left early, just eggs, bread, and a little peace of mind. But I forgot my wallet, so I turned around. God, I wish I hadn't. I pulled into the driveway, humming some old Willie Nelson tune, thinking about French toast and whether Thomas was awake yet. The door creaked open. I stepped inside. Get. Du get. The house didn't greet me like it usually did. No creaking stairs. No murmurs from the living room. Just silence that wrapped itself around my neck like a noose. And then I heard it. Not moaning. Not even whispering. Just breathing. 2 different rhythms. Close. Intimate. Coming from upstairs. I climbed the steps one at a time. My hand on the rail shook, but not from fear. From something worse. That bone-deep sense that you already know what's waiting behind the door. I opened our bedroom door, and there they were. My husband, shirtless beneath the covers. My mother Velma curled up beside him like a satisfied snake. Her head rested on his chest. His arm draped over her shoulder. Their eyes were closed, but they weren't sleeping. I could tell, and that's when I heard her giggle. A soft, wicked sound. The kind of sound a woman makes when she thinks the world is hers. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching. It took them a full 10 seconds to realize I was there. Velma turned first, brushing her hair behind her ear like it was her bed, her house, her man. Thomas looked up, froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. De la... Está married. I raised my hand. Don't. Just that. One word. Velma sat up slowly, still not bothering to cover herself properly. "You always said I took after you," she said with a sick smile. "Guess it's true." I stepped back. The air felt like it had been knocked out of my lungs. Not because of what they'd done, I think deep down I had known for weeks. No. It was the look in their eyes. No shame. No apology. Just triumph. As if I had walked in on something meant to destroy me. And maybe I had. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Minutes passed, then footsteps. She came down first, wearing my robe. She poured herself a cup of coffee like it was any other morning. "You looked surprised," she said. I didn't answer. "You thought he still loved you," she added, sipping. "That's cute." I clenched my fists under the table. "Why, Velma?" She tilted her head. "Because I can. Because no one ever chose me. And now I'm the woman your husband holds at night." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Thomas. It was about me. She had come back into my life to take everything I built to punish me for the life she never had. And Thomas? He wasn't just a man in a bed. He was the bait. That night I didn't sleep. I packed one suitcase, wrote one letter, but I didn't leave. Not yet, because a storm had begun inside me, and I needed her to feel it. He didn't cry. That's what I remember most. Not the heartbreak. Not the nausea. Not even the humiliation. Just the shocking stillness in my chest. I sat on the porch until midnight, listening to the crickets sing the same song they'd sung every summer of my life. But this time, the melody felt foreign, like I didn't belong in this world anymore. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a daughter. I was a ghost sitting in her own bones, watching her reflection fade from the glass window in front of her. Thomas never came out to explain. Velma didn't apologize. They just stayed inside, like vultures fat on a fresh kill. And me? I stayed outside, waiting for something inside me to either break or burn. It burned. By sunrise, I made breakfast. Bacon, eggs, and buttered toast. Velma came downstairs in my silk nightgown. She had the nerve to kiss Thomas on the cheek right in front of me like I was just the live-in maid. He glanced at me once. I saw the shame flash in his eyes, but he didn't say a word. "Sovart." I placed their plates on the table. She dug in without hesitation. He muttered a thank you. I stood there, watching them eat the breakfast I made in the house I paid for. "You made the eggs too runny," Velma said with a wrinkle of her nose. "I like mine firm." I leaned down slowly, so my lips were right near her ear. "You know," I whispered, "it's hard to chew when your jaw's wired shut." She looked up, startled. I smiled and walked away. Something in me was cracking, but not like glass. No, like a shell. And underneath that shell was a woman I hadn't seen in years. A woman who didn't beg, didn't whimper, didn't ask for love. That day, I began keeping a journal. Not for therapy, for evidence. I started watching, listening. I noticed how Thomas always looked over his shoulder now. How Velma kept checking my expressions like she was waiting for me to explode. I never did. Instead, I was kind. Too kind. The kind of sweet that makes people suspicious. I cleaned the house. I cooked their meals. I even bought Velma a silk scarf she admired in a catalog. "Oh, Della," she said one afternoon, wrapping it around her throat. "Maybe you're not as weak as I thought." I smiled. "I'm glad you think so." But inside me, there was a quiet rumble, because I knew something she didn't. The most dangerous woman in the room isn't the one screaming. It's the one who smiles while sharpening her knife. That night, I lay awake next to no one. Alone in the guest bedroom, listening to them laugh from behind my old door. It should have broken me, but it didn't. Because I had a plan. No, I wasn't going to poison her. Or set fire to the sheets. That would have been too quick, too merciful. I was going to let her rot slowly in the truth. I was going to remind her that no matter how many kisses she stole, or how many nights she spent in my bed, she would always be what she had always been, an empty woman trying to steal a full life. And as for Thomas, had to learn too, because men like him don't survive women like me. They thought I'd break. They waited for me to cry, to beg, to scream and curse and slam doors like a woman shattered. But I never did. I just kept smiling, folding laundry, cooking dinner, watching them, and slowly, they started to watch each other. It began with little things. Velma's perfume would mysteriously disappear, only to reappear in the mailbox. Thomas's car keys would go missing for hours, then turn up in the freezer. One morning, he found her lipstick on his work shirt, only he swore he never wore that shirt around her. They started whispering to each other more quietly, locking phones, leaving the room when the other entered. I didn't need to touch them. I just tilted the mirror toward them and let them see themselves clearly. Velma always thought she was clever, a master manipulator, but she had one fatal flaw. She needed to be worshipped. So I stopped reacting. No anger, no sadness, no fear. She'd sashay around in her tight robes, rub Thomas's shoulders right in front of me, toss her silver hair and flash her aging charm, but I'd just nod and say, "You look tired today, Mom." That word Mom burned her every time I said it, because it reminded her that I was the daughter she abandoned and now wanted to erase. And Thomas? He started to miss the way I used to look at him. The warmth, the softness, the safety. Velma was fire, but I had been home, and now that home was gone. One evening, I told Thomas I was going out to dinner with a friend from church. There's a new pastor visiting from Nashville. I smiled. Thought I'd show him some Southern hospitality. His jaw twitched. "You're going out dressed like that?" Velma asked, her voice tight as she looked at my elegant navy blue dress. "Yes," I said sweetly. "It still fits me like it used to, doesn't it?" I left without another word. Truth is, there was no pasta, no dinner. I sat at a cafe down the street and watched the night creep in. But when I returned 2 hours later, the living room lights were off, and through the window, I saw them fighting, her voice sharp, his lourdeur. Velma shoved him. He slammed his hand on the table. I leaned against the porch rail, let the cool night air wrap around me like armor. It was working. They were unraveling not because I pushed them, but because their entire relationship was built on betrayal. And betrayal always turns inward eventually. That night, I wrote in my journal, "The best revenge is silence. Let them destroy each other with the weapons they used on me." And I meant it. Velma's mask had started to slip. Thomas's eyes were beginning to look hollow. They were no longer lovers. They were co-conspirators in a slow, shared downfall. And I was the shadow in the hallway, the smile in the mirror, the silence at the dinner table. They were so busy watching each other now, they'd forgotten who they betrayed first. By the end of that week, Velma packed a small bag. "I need space," she told Thomas. I didn't argue. She didn't look at me when she left, but I looked at her, and I smiled, because she didn't know I'd already opened the letter in her purse, the one from the bank, the one that proved she drained my savings account behind my back using forged documents. That was going to be her real goodbye gift. But not yet. First, I wanted her to feel alone, and cold, the way I had felt the night I found them in my bed. I woke up that morning knowing it was time. The woman who'd walked into that house months ago, frail, hopeful, wounded, no longer existed. She had died quietly one night on the porch. The woman who stood in her place now, she was dangerous in her silence, unshakable in her calm. I packed my bags slowly, not in fear but in ritual. Each item folded with intention, each drawer closed with peace. I wasn't running, I was reclaiming. As I zipped up the last suitcase, I left the letter, the one from the bank, right on the kitchen table. With it, I placed a copy of the legal report I'd filed. Velma had stolen over 32, zero in my name, and now she'd have to explain that to the law. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for the 10-year-old version of me, the little girl who once waited at the window for a mother who never came back. The girl who deserved justice. Thomas stood at the door when he saw me with the suitcase. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice cracked, but not from worry, from guilt. I smiled. "Somewhere I can breathe." He stepped forward. "Della, I made a mistake." I paused. Let him feel the weight of silence. "You didn't just make a mistake, Thomas," I said quietly. "You chose her over me every single day, and I watched you do it." He blinked, speechless. I wasn't the woman he married anymore. I was the woman who survived both her mother and her husband in the same bed. And somehow, I felt proud. I cooked for you. I loved you. I trusted you, I said. And you let her spit in all of that. He didn't try to stop me again, because deep down, he knew. He lost something he'd never get back. As I walked down the porch steps with my head held high, I looked over at the house one last time, not with sadness, but with victory. It wasn't my home anymore. It was the graveyard of everything they buried behind my back. And I was free. I moved into a small house 2 towns over. Quiet, peaceful, with lavender bushes by the window and sunlight that poured into the kitchen every morning like a blessing. I started teaching piano again, joined a book club, got a cat named Mercy. At 85 years old, I realized something. You're never too old to walk away from pain, and you're never too broken to begin again. I never saw Velma or Thomas again. I heard Velma tried to flee the state once the bank case caught up to her. I also heard Thomas got sick not long after I left. Lonely hearts tend to collapse under the weight of their own silence. But I didn't rejoice. I didn't hatte. Just lived. I forgave them in time, not for them, but for me. Because the strongest kind of healing is the one that doesn't need an apology. To my dear viewers on YouTube, if you've been moved by this story, if Della Jean's quiet strength and haunting journey touched your soul, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing your thoughts. Was there a chapter that hit you the hardest? Like, comment, and share with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for watching. And always remember, you have the power to walk away even with trembling legs.